There's no way that the Ukrainian army could stop a Russian invasion, but they could make it more costly. And look, it's one thing to take territory. The Russians could do that, but to hold it is something completely different. It's interesting that the British have given 2,000 shoulder-launched anti-tank weapons to the Ukrainians, and they've started to train them in the west of the country, in Lviv. Well, it might be a bit late for that kind of training, but it's interesting, because those are the kind of weapons that you would use in a guerrilla war. Now, having said all that, here in Kiev, the government is really trying to calm things down. The president said yesterday there's no need to panic. The defense minister said today in Parliament, look, people should just go home and sleep easy. It seems to be the British and the Americans who are the ones at the moment who are, in a sense, talking this up, trying to give the message to Putin that he must not do this. The Ukrainians are trying to keep calm.
What about the mood music from Moscow?
Well, the mood music in Moscow, maybe it's like the 1812 overture before they get to the bit with the cannons. And yes, I know that was about the defense of Russia. And Russia, of course, would say that this is about its defense too, although NATO has done nothing to threaten Russia. Dmitry Peskov, that's Vladimir Putin's spokesman, said today that it was the Americans who were fomenting tension. But at the same time, in the south and west military areas of Russia, that's quite near the Ukrainian border, there were exercises today with jet aircraft going overhead and Iskander missiles. So under the current circumstances, that does seem a little threatening. And, you know, back to the 1812 overture, in the end, might not be imminent, but in the end, there were cannons.
The 1812 overture. We'll get you to hum that one in a minute. Lindsay Hilsum, thanks very much indeed in Kiev. As the White House mulls over the decision to send 8,500 troops to Eastern Europe, the unity of NATO and the Western alliance has been put into sharp focus as diplomatic efforts to de-escalate have proved unsuccessful. Well, we can now speak to our Washington correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy. Siobhan.
Well, Matt, after that announcement yesterday of 8,500 US troops being put on high alert, the president in the last few minutes has said he didn't intend for that move to be provocative in any way. And the White House is stressing that there is no intention or interest or desire by the president to send troops directly into Ukraine. Instead, the talk is still of diplomacy and of unity with America's allies in Europe. That was also the point today of a joint press conference by President Macron of France and the new German Chancellor Olaf Scholz today in Germany. Failing a breakthrough, though, a senior White House administration official today gave us details of the sanctions that they are readying, and they are saying that they will be much harsher than those that were imposed on Russia when it annexed Crimea in 2014. Back then, those sanctions, even they led to a recession, but now the White House source said this time will start at the top of the escalation ladder and will stay there. The talk is still of diplomacy and a window for Russia to retreat, but neither the US nor its allies are holding out much hope. So the deterrence operation is underway in earnest. Today, the latest shipment of American military equipment arrived in Ukraine. Boxes of lethal aid, as they call it, ammunition for the fighters on the front line. They're coming by sea too. These Danish frigates will join NATO's forces in the Baltic Sea. And remember, the US has now put more than 8,000 troops on high alert to send to Eastern Europe, not Ukraine, should Moscow make its move.
And this is really important. I had a very, very, very good meeting, total unanimity with all the European leaders.
That was President Biden's summary of his meeting with European leaders yesterday. They're desperate to show a united front in the face of Russian aggression. Hence this joint press conference today between President Macron of France and Germany's new Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Macron has said he believes France should have its own dialogue with Moscow and is pushing wherever he can for what he calls a true European army. While Germany, which is heavily dependent on Russia for its energy supply, is still holding back on sending weapons to the front line. But the cracks within NATO were laid bare by the Croatian president. When it comes to relations and international security, he said, I see inconsistency and dangerous behaviour. An arrangement that would take into account the security interest of Russia must be found and will be found. Words that could have been written by Vladimir Putin himself, though he was ostensibly busy today giving Russian athletes a virtual send-off ahead of the Beijing Winter Olympics in 2 weeks. He won't want to upset his powerful ally, China's Xi Jinping, by attacking Ukraine just as the games get underway.
This is a crisis of Vladimir Putin's making. He can use the threat of force and then do something more discreet. In fact, I think that's the most likely, military scenario. He has some time on his hands. He's playing a long game. The one thing he does have is America's attention. Here in Washington, there's a lot of talk about, shifting focus to China, and Vladimir Putin is saying, not so fast.
More guessing about what Vladimir Putin might do next, which is exactly how he likes it. Of course, no one really knows when or if he'll make his military move. Only that his desire to stop Ukraine's westward drift and reassert Moscow's authority is so great, he wants the world to believe he's prepared to go to war.
Well, earlier I spoke to Lesia Vasilenko, member of Ukraine's parliament, and I started by asking her if she felt safer or more at risk by all the talk of support from NATO countries.
It doesn't enshrine any confidence when we have allied countries saying that no soldier of theirs will be fighting in Ukraine if Russia launches a full-on attack on the whole country. That is not comforting news for sure. But at the same time, of course, Ukraine feels the tremendous support that we have been receiving from all NATO ally countries. I think it's just the beginning of new bilateral partnerships being formed around Ukrainian security within the already existing NATO framework.
But what you really want is for NATO soldiers to be based on Ukrainian soil, which is something that you're not going to get.
What we really want is for Russia to back off and allow Ukraine to develop as a freestanding sovereign country that Ukraine really is. And what Ukrainians really want is to be part of the wider European family and, of course, of the NATO alliance.
And if Russia were to invade, to invade further into Ukraine, what would you do personally?
I don't believe in a full-on attack. I think that what we are to expect are localized attacks in certain regions of Ukraine. And in that case, for me personally, I don't think that much will change because myself, as millions of my countrymen and women, have been living in this state of war for the last 8 years. And we are fighting for our country and for the right of our children to be living in a free and independent and strong Ukraine.
The Germans have apparently been blocking the sale of German-made arms to Ukraine. What's your response to that? Well,
Germany needs to make a choice whether they are a democracy protecting other democracies or whether they wish to play up to a totalitarian regime and start the ball of history rolling again.
So a choice between Russian money and Western principles, you're saying?
More or less. And also human lives.
That's pretty harsh.
But it's the truth.
What about these reports from the British government, from British intelligence, that Moscow is planning virtually a coup in Kiev to replace the current president with someone who's more friendly towards Moscow?
Moscow's coups haven't played out quite so well in the past. Their last attempt to impact Ukrainian politics directly ended with the ousting of Ukrainian ex-president Yanukovych and the Maidan, a revolution, and then eventually a war, which is still going on. I don't believe that will happen, again, because I believe in the people of Ukraine who are standing strong and united for our own country and for our right to be living in a free, independent country in Europe.
Okay, Lesia Vasilenko, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for that as well.